In the mist, a forgotten land exists, filled with ancient structures and creatures. A monumental tower rises in the middle of it all. All dreamers, the kind, the lonely, the vulnerable, and everyone in between. The tower calls for them all, urging them to reach the top. To do so, the player, one of those dreamers, must find a way to the tower, lost within the maze-like nature of these lands. Before we dive more on what I made in this last month, I have a quick announcement. As the project grows, I want to invest more financially into it, with new assets, sounds, musics, and so on. If you would like to help me with that, I've created a Patreon, which I will link in the description. Alternatively, you can support me by liking this video and subscribing to my channel, which would also be a huge help. If you want to stay updated, I've left links of my Twitter account and new Discord server in the description. Since the last video, I've implemented a lot of suggestions from the comments and started working on new and exciting stuff. To start, let me quickly show you the improvements I made based on your feedback. I consider feedback really important for the development, and it significantly boosts the quality of my project. So please, always comment below with new ideas and improvements if you have something in mind. In the last video, many comments pointed out the poor quality of the running animation, and you guys were right. The animation didn't meet my standards, and as you pointed it out, the knees were too high and the overall animation curves were off. I took all the feedback and spent some time studying how to create a new running animation. I spent a few hours learning new techniques in Blender and came up with a new animation. For me, at least, this feels much better than the old one. And thanks for the comments in the last video, helped me to understand what I needed to do to improve this. While revamping the running cycle, I also reworked and created brand new animations. The character now has doubled the quantity of animation clips. After that, I stumbled upon a Twitter account of another developer showing his game, Motor Slice. They were sharing an awesome clip of their game featuring a hand-eye key mechanic, where the character reaches out for nearby surfaces. I've always liked this idea in games, so I started implementing in my own game. Shout out for the Motor Slice developer for tips on the implementation. Check out their game, it's really impressive. Additionally, I also implemented a new foot IK placement system that I bought. The old one didn't meet my new animation standards, but the new one provides much smoother foot positioning and is way more scalable. Oh, and the character teeters when walking on narrow passages. Okay, so to not drag too much in the video, I will quickly show the other improvements I made. The ocean shader is now improved. Before that, the patterns in the water were too obvious, now they are way more subtle. Shipwrecks are now scattered around the ocean. I was thinking about implementing this, but I saw one of the comments giving this idea, so I thought it was a good timing. Where are they from? Why did they sink? Wobbly hair for the character. To be fair, I thought that implementing this was going to be hard, but I found a GitHub repository where the developer made a really good system to apply wobbly physics in meshes, so I did that in the hair. While I was adding this, I accidentally applied the effect on the entire character's body, so I made this. Anyway, it's a nice detail now and sure gives a more natural feel for the character. Finally, a model for the saved shrines. They are now much better suited for the environment. After all, they were just cubes. One last improvement I made was on the day and night cycle and skyblocks. Thanks to the developer SpaceCat Studios, I was able to implement a free copy of their highly customizable dynamic sky. This asset also includes physical clouds, which gives me the flexibility to use the sky as a design resource. For example, I can create a section of the game above the clouds, adding more visual depth. The asset is incredibly efficient because the clouds use a shader technique called shell texturing, essentially layering textures on top of each other to create a 3D effect. The results speak for themselves, with new lighting, post-processing effects, and beautifully rendered skies that enhance the atmosphere of the game. I will be leaving their asset store page in the description if you are interested in checking this out. Now, let's talk about the hoverboard. Thanks for the suggestions in the comments, all of them were very creative. After many comments suggesting new ideas, we found a great solution. This is the curio. Curio is an old word meaning something unique and rare, which fits this floating rock. According to the flavor text, the curio is a fragment of a larger structure, still seeking its origin place. In the future, players will discover that the curio's origin is actually from the floating castle, and the curio is just another part of this massive structure. Besides the new model, I added new animations and implemented sounds and particles. I still want to create a more natural animation for the hoverboard, making the player tilt with its rotation. After completing all these improvements, I felt a bit of burnout. I've experienced this a few times since I started making games. Nowadays, to recover, I simply put the project aside and rest for a few days, working on other things for fun and avoiding game development altogether. I recently watched a video about how Studio Ghibli's director, Hayao Miyazaki, deals with burnout. He just walks away and does something to relax. So I did the same. I rested for 2 days and I was just relaxing, testing out some funny ideas and making messy code. No, bear with me, because this will be important later in the video. The idea I had for the prototype was a silly roguelike game with an isometric camera. The main mechanic was that the player would be a mage who could combine random letters to cast spells. The twist was that every spell could be cast from the start, but the player had to discover which words cast which spells. I finished this prototype just adding one spell, banana. The mage just summons a bunch of bananas. That was it. After that, I finished my rest and started working again on the main project. But wait, I thought, that is really a good idea. It would be awesome if the player had access to everything from the get-go, but didn't know how to use the mechanics. So I decided to implement this mechanic in my game and change everything. For those who have followed me since the first videos, you know that my game's main mechanics have always been item-based. If the player wanted to do something, they'd use an item they discovered. But now, I had the opportunity to overhaul all this inventory system and create something truly unique. This is a whispering echo. These are found throughout the game, and each one is unique. But the player interacts with an echo, they learn a unique combination of runes. Each echo performs a distinct function and comes with unique descriptions and lore. For example, this one is for invoking the curio. Instead of an inventory, the player now has a menu to track which echoes they've discovered and which ones remain unknown. The twist is that even if the player hasn't discovered an echo yet, they can still invoke it by figuring out the right combination. So, on a second playthrough, players could use a lot of mechanics they didn't know about on the first playthrough. With this, the power that the characters have is tied to the player's knowledge, not for some level or some grind. Finally, I started working on the next area for the game, For those who saw my last videos, it's common to see me working on block out levels. Now that I'm more comfortable with level design, I will be working on my first level beyond the blocking out phase. So let me show you. This is the Sepulcher Forest. Sepulcher refers to places of rest for the dead, such as mausoleums or graves. It's a strange name for a forest, which isn't usually associated with morbid terms like this one. Approaching this place, the player is first introduced to a broken wall attempting to separate the forest from the rest of the map. Entering here, you can see that this area is much more maze-like and enclosed than the rest of the map. Advancing further, you reach the center of this forest, which branches out to other interesting points. There's a campfire to rest here. This will also be a meeting place for some important NPCs in the future. For now, we can just chill here and take the vista. I aimed to make this forest feel as big as possible, making the player feel like an ant surrounded by giant structures, each with a long forgotten meaning. There are some places I didn't finish for this video. For example, this will be the Church of the Root, one of the most important locations of the game, where the player will find one of the unique bosses. Over here is the Burned City, a civilization that tried to push back the advancing forest, which grows like an infection. They used the fire to fight back, but that was also their downfall. Now, my favorite spot in the game that I made. This is the flower field. This is a peaceful place where players can relax and reflect. I love that the players can find this calm area after exploring the dark, maze-like parts of the forest. It's interesting that this field of flowers is right next to the Burned City, showing a contrast between the shadows and the beauty.